our SNY NBA insider, Ian Begley. We are joined by SNY NBA contributor, Nicole Moss, also a host at SI Now, and Stefan Bondy is back, the Knicks beat reporter for the New York Daily News. We're streaming live on SNY.TV as well as our Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube channels. As always, we tip things off with the baseline. And Ian, so the Knicks closed the Utah lead last night to 4 when Julius Randle and Evan Fournier came in for Obi Toppin and Emmanuel Quickley. But then, as they went in, the Jazz went on a 12-0 run to seal their win over the Knicks. So what exactly was behind this costly decision late in the game?
Yeah, this was Tom Thibodeau deciding to bring his starters back at that point. You know, we asked him about it after the game, and he said that's the point where you have to decide to stick with your bench or bring your starters back. He obviously decided to bring the starters back. Things unraveled from there, and the decision obviously backfired because that lineup with Quickley and with some of the reserves, Obi Toppin and others, they started the fourth quarter. I think the Knicks were down 12, and they cut that lead to 4, Chris, as you mentioned. And then Randall comes in, Fournier comes in, a little bit later, Burks comes in, and that's it. The lead was gone. The Knicks fell apart. So it was one of those clear instances where the decision by Thibodeau did not work out. It backfired. And, you know, if you want to turn it into a big picture thing, the idea that Thibodeau, his reliance on his starters, has he over-relied on the starters, and has he not given enough time to these bench units that seem to keep them in games or get them back into games more often than the starters get them out of games?
And to Ian's point, Ashley, do you believe this substitution decision is really a microcosm of how fans and critics feel of Tom Thibodeau's coaching in year 2 with the Knicks?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is kind of, the critique that just won't stop when it comes to Tom Thibodeau, right? It's kind of not sticking with the hot hand, not sticking with the energy, trying to force a circle into a triangle, if you will. It's just not going to work. And I say this all the times, for all the things that Tibbs does well, one of his worst attributes is his stubbornness, right? He goes into the game with a game plan, and he is willing to force that game plan regardless of what's happening on the court. And what separates a good coach from a great coach, from the level of Popovich and Eric Spoelstra down in Miami and some of the other great coaches across the league, is that they go into a game with a game plan, but how the game unfolds, the trials and tribulations of the basketball game of all 4 quarters, is how they make their adjustments. It seems like Tibbs sees a completely different game unfold on the court, or he's just determined to make his game plan work regardless of if that game is actually unfolding in real time. So it's extremely frustrating. And especially with a team that, look, at the end of the day, the season's a wash, right? This is the time that you experiment. This is the time that you give the guys, the young guys who are probably going to be part of this team in some way, shape, or form for a much longer period of time than, say, your vets, the Julius Randles and the Evan Fourniers. When Derrick Rose was on the floor, before he had gotten injured, this is the time you start manipulating, and you look at and you start playing with chemistry, you start playing with rotations. And it just seems like it's a lot of the same from Tibbs instead of different. And this is the moment to start playing with different.
Yeah. And Stefan, I'm glad Ashley brought that up about how at this stage of the season and where the Knicks are, the playoffs are really a reach at this point. So you have to clearly, you have to have a balance in playing the young guys in the right situation. But given all the circumstances that we see right now, wouldn't it have made more sense to leave IQ and Toppin in and see what happens? Because, they're not. It would take a miracle for them to get into the play-in game right now.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I get it. You can criticize Thibodeau for his lack of in-game adjustments. You can criticize him for not rolling with the hot hand sometimes. But this question of whether he should just throw in all the young guys and take out the vets and give all the minutes to the young guys now. I mean, I'm just over. Every year it's the same thing, man. I remember when I first started this beat, it was Jaren Grant should get playing time. And then it was Alonzo Trier. And then it was Frank Ntilikina and Kevin Ntilikina. These players ended up being anything, man. And so, once you start taking out all the vets, then the question becomes, well, why are you alienating the vets? We saw with Kemba Walker. He took out Kemba Walker. Then everybody was criticizing Tom Thibodeau for the way he handled that. So, listen, there's a give and take with everything. They're still mathematically in the playoff picture. I wouldn't just say, all right, let's just cut back all the vets minutes and start playing all the young guys.
No, but I think there's a like you said, I think 2 things can be true at the same time, right? Yes. For all intents and purposes, mathematically, they're still in it. But when you see the type of game that the Knicks have been playing consistently, you think the season's pretty much a wash, right? That doesn't mean that you go ahead and you just rid the vets of all their responsibilities, but it does mean that this is the time in the season where you can start seeing what works and what doesn't work. And I think we've seen a lot of the same from Coach Tibbs, and we know at this point what works and what doesn't with what he's been doing. Now it's time to see, well, okay, so with what you're doing, but also some new stuff, how can we go ahead and change the way this team looks? And it just seems the unwillingness and almost, the justification as to, well, we don't hand out minutes here and you have to earn those minutes. Well, how do you earn minutes if you're not getting the opportunity to go ahead and play for them and showcase that you should be out on the court longer? If Obi has the hot hand, why are you pulling him for Julius Randle? It's just a constant snowball and a constant carousel rather of decision making that doesn't make sense, and then justification as to why he made the decisions in the first place.
Well, that's diminishing the idea that Thibodeau is not seeing something that we're not seeing in practice. He's a lot more than any of us. He sees things that we don't see. And the Obi Toppin, I mean, let's be real. He has an elite skill, but he could be a liability in a lot of other areas. And, RJ Barrett, he's a young player. He's getting 40 plus minutes a game. You know why? Because he's good. He can do a lot of things. I don't think Obi Toppin is ready for that. Me personally, and I trust that Tibbs, having seen what he sees in practice, can make that judgment.
What's your justification as to why you pull him when he is playing well?
No, that's what I said when I opened up. I said you can criticize him for the in-game adjustments. You can criticize him for not rolling with the hot hand. But the idea that, hey, we should just give minutes to somebody because they're younger and we want to tinker, I just don't subscribe to that.
Here's one other thing on that. It's like kind of the flip side of it is I think that when you say everything is based on merit and we're giving out minutes based on what you earn, that makes all the sense in the world, right? And I asked Thibodeau about it the other day. He said a lot of it is based on practice, what you show in practice, and then how you fit with the unit. So take that as you may. But also, if Julius Randle's making mistakes, if he's turning the ball over, if he's not giving you 100% effort, and a young player who's being held to a certain standard sees that, I think there's a chance that young player gets maybe turned off by the head coach and sees that message as inaccurate. The idea that you're holding everybody to this high standard when you see, a Randle get to play through mistakes, a Barrett get to play through mistakes, but other players not able to do that.
Yeah, definitely have been a lot of mixed messages from Tom Thibodeau during the course of this season. But of course, you guys run the show, so be sure to submit your questions in the chats wherever you're watching the show. And, speaking of Julius Randle, Stefan, he went 6 of 21 from the field after going 6 of 22 Friday against the Wizards. Then he gets into a little shoving match, whatever you want to call it, with Rudy Gobert after the game. So what was your reaction to Randle's whole night last night as a whole?
Well, he's struggling, and it was disappointing to see how he reacted at the end of the game. I don't think anybody knows what happened because it was confusing as to not only his explanation, but Donovan Mitchell's explanation, and then Rudy Gobert's explanation. So listen, what I saw was on tape, and it looked like Rudy Gobert was trying to calm the issue down. He was trying to put his arm around him. That's a symbol of peace. And Julius Randle's reaction to that was to push him. And what it just comes across as is a sore loser. And it just, it's a continuation of this temper that he's shown throughout this season. That wasn't really part of his rap coming into this year. Certainly not part of his rap when he signed with the Knicks. But something has changed with him in terms of his attitude, and it's really shown through this season. And it is not encouraging, and it's not befitting of the player you want to label with the franchise tag.
Yeah, so on that one, Stefan, last night, Donovan Mitchell said that he thought it was more so Randle being upset with an official and, it wasn't directed at Rudy Gobert. Maybe Gobert, as you said, was trying to play peacemaker, and Randle had said, too, that his frustration was about an official. So, again, that was the explanation after the game. But, I think you look at the shooting numbers from Julius Randle last night and really throughout much of this season, and that's where this season, to me, has taken its biggest hit, because last year, Julius Randle was making everything. He was hitting a very solid percentage on mid-range. He was shooting very well from beyond the arc, and that opened up so much for the Knicks offense. And now, teams, I think, came into this season with a game plan, an aggressive game plan on Randle, and the adjustment hasn't been there, and the shot making hasn't been there. And I think if you want to talk about, players' emotions, guess at what's going on. I would assume that's where the frustration stems from, if you want to go there. And you're seeing that frustration at different points throughout the season. But to me, it's just like the shot making. Shot making is not there, and everything else kind of flows from there.
Yeah, and since the shot making isn't there, his defense and his passion, I guess, for the game, wanes. And that's something you can't do. Like, we've seen players who are, struggling from the field, but they still bring it on the defensive end. They still make the hustle plays. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows except for Julius and his family what exactly is going on, with his persona. But clearly it's not where the Knicks need him to be. And Ashley, I'll ask you, like, are you over Julius Randle at this point, or are you still a believer like he can come back next year and still show you something?
I'm on the fence with this, and that's big for me to say because I've always been a Julius Randle advocate. I've been someone who, gives him the benefit of the doubt. And listen, I was born and raised in New York by New York parents who were born and raised in New York City. So I know attitude, all right? I know bad energy. I know playing with a gulliness and an aggressiveness, but there's levels to it. And it just seems like with Julius, it goes beyond the level that it has to. There's nothing wrong with playing with a chip, especially when you're not playing well. That chip can sometimes drive you, right? That chip can sometimes drive the team and can be the glue that formulates a team from getting from a really bad point to a really good point in the season, right? But it seems like Julius Randle's energy is more detrimental to the team than it has been beneficial. And that's where, you start looking at him a little bit sideways. Do I think that Julius Randle can get back to the Julius Randle that was, getting MVP chance in the Garden? Absolutely. I think that the situation has to be conducive for him to do that. But I think a lot of the situation being conducive for him to do that also relies in him. It relies in checking his attitude. It relies in checking his ego. Look, we know you're not playing well. Anybody who knows, whoever's played a competitive sport, who's a competitor, knows that can weigh on you. And it's frustrating night in and night out, regardless of where you play. You're just not the guy you were last season. I get the frustration. But those guys on the court didn't do that. The refs didn't do that. If the fans didn't do that. So it gets to a point where you can't continue to make justifications and excuses for someone who has the power to change the trajectory of not only his career and the reputation that he has harnessed this season, and just doesn't do it. So I'm on the fence. I wouldn't say that I'm over him because I still think that there's a lot of good in Julius and there's a lot of good that he can bring to a team. But the attitude and the theatrics and the dramatics, I'm 100% over it. You're a grown person. Act like one. It's enough. You can't have RJ Barrett at 21 years old being more of a role model and more of a leader for this team than you are. It's just unacceptable. And if he's going to continue that, then, then decisions have to be made because this team is going up and they can't go ahead and have anything that's going to continue to bring them back to where they were.
I just want to jump in one thing on Ashley's point. Ashley, Lincoln High School's finest, by the way, Coney Island. Let's just say that. She talked about being from New York. The one thing, just for me, just my personal opinion, I try to stay away from analyzing, what's going on off the court for a player, unless I hear something from that player or from somebody that I trust that I know to be true. I try to stay away from guessing at it. But the thing that I think about with Julius Randle is, if you look at the last 6 weeks, let's say, he's had stretches where he's played really, really well. And where he's impacted the game. It hasn't translated to wins because the Knicks haven't won a lot of games, but he's looked like the Randle of last year at certain points over these past few weeks. And so, is his attitude impacting him that night? Is it just when things aren't going well? I have no idea, but I know that there are nights when he plays really well. I think the bigger question to me, at least with Randle, is if you're bringing in another a star player, 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it, how does that impact what you're asking Randle to do? And can he do that? And to me, that's where I go when I think about the future of this team and what they try to do with the roster, because Julius Randle's effective with the ball in his hands. So what does that mean for the next player coming in? How is it all going to fit?
Yeah. Can I make one point on that too?
Yeah.
This Julius Randle has been given every chance to succeed on the court this season by the Knicks. This team was built around him. The offense, to a large degree, was built around him. So it's not the ref's fault that when he's struggling, it's not his teammates' fault. I hope he looks inward here after this season to kind of reflect on what happened because like I said, he was given every opportunity this season to succeed. And the struggles with his shot and the struggles, dealing with his temper is kind of on him. And I would hope he would look inward, and that's kind of how he can improve in the offseason.
And that doesn't take away from the fact that, look, the team, the way it was constructed just isn't working. The two things can be true at the same time. Yes, the team is not working. They made the best out of what was available. It doesn't work. That's fine. That doesn't rid Julius of fault of what you can control. And for somebody who played with the late great Kobe Bryant, the Mamba mentality in itself is controlling what you can control and adjusting your mindset to go ahead and better your surroundings. That's an individual inward thing. So yes, you can be frustrated with the situation. You can be frustrated that this season is a drastic decline from last. You can be frustrated that the pieces that were brought in aren't working. You can be frustrated, that Coach Payne is now in Louisville. You can be frustrated with so many different aspects, but the things that you can control are on you to control. And instead of pointing the finger, he's got to figure it out, because whether it's in New York or somewhere else, that reputation that he has built this season is going to continue to follow him until he can get a grip on his emotions. And he has to do that.
Yeah, that's not something you want at all. But as always, visit SNY.TV for superb Knicks coverage. It has the latest edition of Begley's Mailbag, plus Ian's reporting, as Ashley was bringing up, on Kenny Payne leaving for the Louisville head coaching job. So if you're begging for more Begley, visit SNY.TV. And speaking of stars, Ian, something you brought up earlier about bringing a 1A, 1B star in to maybe pair up with Julius Randle. Last week on the Putback, I asked you which stars could be on the Knicks wish list in the future, and you named Donovan Mitchell as one of them. So we saw him last night for the Jazz. Is there a chance, though, we're seeing a lot more of him often one day?
I would say that there's a lot of hurdles there before you're talking about Donovan Mitchell being traded to the Knicks. First of all, Donovan Mitchell would have to request a trade. I don't think Utah's volunteering to trade Donovan Mitchell. He would, I would assume, have to publicly in some way, shape, or form request a trade. And then if you're Utah, you've got Mitchell under contract for several years. So if you decide to honor the trade request, you don't have to send him where he wants to go. You send him to the team with the best package. And the Knicks could the Knicks offer the best package? I don't know. I would assume dozens of teams would be interested. I would assume that Miami would be interested. So you look there what they could offer. But I would assume also that there's teams with players who've established themselves who they would trade those players, and that package would be better than what the Knicks could offer. But this is all hypothetical at this point. One thing I thought was interesting that Mitchell was talking about last night, which you hear from players sometimes, is the idea of when you're home, it's kind of overwhelming a little bit, because not what happens on the court, but off the court. Like, people are trying to see you, friends, family, trying to get tickets in order for the game for your friends and family. It can be a lot. And Donovan said his rookie year, it was a lot to deal with, and it's gotten easier over time. It's easier to have fun now because he's used to it. But I think that aspect of a player coming home is not something that's talked about a lot, but it is something that player has to deal with. Just the idea that your friends and family are right there, and it could be, a distraction to that player if they are playing 41 games at home.
Yeah. Some players, they embrace it. Other players, like you said, it's a hindrance because you got cousins and aunties like, yeah, can you give me this? Can you give me that? Like, and
listen, Donovan, get yourself somebody on your team whose sole responsibility is to tell people, nah, he can't. Nah, he can't. Nah, he can't. Don't even worry about that. That is an easy fix, Donovan Mitchell. You come to New York, we will take care of the rest. Okay. So don't even worry about that. That's an easy fix.
And Ashley, I know you saw Donovan RJ dap it up after the game yesterday. How would you, obviously you're a fan of Donovan coming to the Knicks. Yeah. How would you like Donovan Mitchell on the New York Knicks?
I think Donovan Mitchell is just the superstar that you need to kind of take this team to the next level. I think that, again, like Ian said, there's a lot of moving pieces. So in a perfect world, if you can get him, you get him. But you also don't want to go ahead and send yourself into a Carmelo Anthony era where you trade your entire team for one guy, and that one guy's there and then there's nobody surrounding him, right? So in a perfect world, if you can do it and you can do it smartly, absolutely. I mean, Donovan Mitchell, he has the demeanor, he has the hometown feel, the hometown kid vibe to him, much like Kemba Walker did when he returned. He has the skill set. He's still so young. He's one of the top players in the league currently. And I think that he fits in perfectly with the young guys on the team, the guys that we're trying to go ahead and develop as the core of this team, the RJ Barretts, the Obi Toppins, the Grimes, now the Immanuel Quickleys. Now, how many of those supporting plays you'd be able to keep if you went ahead and got a Donovan Mitchell? I don't know. But again, in a perfect world, I'm keeping all those guys and I'm getting Donovan Mitchell. And I think that that's a really, really good team that you would see in playoff contention and in championship contention years down the line and continually season to season.
What kind of difficulties, Stefan, do you believe would derail, though, a Knicks Spider pairing in your eyes?
Well, Ian kind of talked about it. He's under contract for a long time, and they got Danny Ainge over there in Utah now. And he's not the kind of person to give up leverage and just trade one of his best players for nothing. It would require Donovan Mitchell to basically come out and pull a James Harden or a Ben Simmons and say, I'm not going to play. Like, you got to trade me. And you got to trade me to the New York Knicks. And, you know, people that know him and that I've talked to say that's not really his personality. So to me, I mean, it's a long shot. It's not something that, you know, given Donovan Mitchell's contract situation, really seems likely at this point.
So basically what you're saying is Knicks fans should not be dreaming or hoping, thinking.
Tampering happens.
You can dream all you want.
You
can dream all you want.
Every day. Don't worry. Tampering.
It just ain't gonna be a reality. That's my take on it. That's how I feel on it. What do you say, Ashley?
I said tampering happens every day.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does every single day. But make sure to watch Geico Sports Night all night and every night starting at 11 p.m. We have the latest news, rumors, and analysis on the Knicks and highlights plus reaction after every game. Geico Sports Night every night at 11 and into the morning. And let's talk some positives because we've been talking about a lot of negative situations with this team. Stefan, Immanuel Quickley, do you believe he's turned a corner over the last few weeks?
Well, yeah. And, you know, with him, a lot of it is about whether his shot is falling or not. And in the beginning of the season, it wasn't. You know, it's hard to, you know, get in his head and say whether that's about confidence, whether that's about shooting form, about something he's doing in practice. But now it's falling. Now he's getting to his spots. I think he figured he was frustrated early in the season about the new foul calling rules, about how they were kind of trying to track down on that Trae Young, James Harden stuff, because he that's part of his game. So he's kind of learning. And as, you know, Thibodeau likes to tell us, these players are extremely intelligent and they adapt and they figure these things out. And so I think we're seeing that with Immanuel Quickley. And that, like you said, that's a positive development in this season because he's a player you're going to count on at some point moving forward. And he's showing that when he can get hot, I mean, this is what you got. He's a microwave scorer. I still don't think he's not the answer at point guard. Yeah. And they still need an answer at point guard. It feels like they've needed an answer at point guard for 15 years. But you know, I think he has turned a corner and he's looked a lot better lately.
And Steph, I would just say real quick, Raymond Felton, let's not forget about his quality player point guard.
Props to Raymond. Also 40-year-old Jason Kidd.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. But on Quickley, you know, it is one of the positives to this disappointing season. I think him coming on late, RJ Barrett taking a leap, those are the positives that you look at. But also on the flip side, you know, if you're talking about making a trade of any significance, if you're talking about trading for a player that can come in and impact winning and bring that player to New York, you know, a player like Immanuel Quickley is someone that a team I'm sure is going to ask about. And the Knicks would have to think long and hard about the idea of departing with a Quickley or a Toppin or a Grimes or draft picks, you know, to get a quality player in a trade. So you look at these young guys, you know, one or two of them would go in a trade if you're talking about bringing back a player, even like a sign and trade with a Jalen Brunson. I mean, that's not going to happen without giving up significant young assets, a player like Quickley. So that's just something to keep an eye on as we move forward here. We see Quickley really come on these past few weeks.
Ashley, what do you believe, you know, looking forward to next season, because clearly there's not a lot to look forward to for this season. What role do you believe IQ should have on the team next season? Do you believe he should be in that starting rotation or coming off that bench, you know, giving them instant offense to help the second unit?
I think it depends what the Knicks do at point guard, right? So if you're able to go ahead and obtain a point guard with more experience and, more of a proven track record, then quickly need to go ahead and come off the bench. And I think that when you're young, your timetable is obviously a lot longer for your development than say somebody who's older, right? So
Yeah.
I think that that's a big part, but I do think that you want to see Quickly get more minutes. You want to see him the opportunity to be able to play through his mistakes, because that's the only way he's going to grow as a player. I think that Immanuel Quickley has the potential to be a solidified point guard on the Knicks if, his career is going to be with the Knicks for the long term. But in order to go ahead and develop that, it's going to take more than just practice. It's going to take more than just scrimmages. You have to give him real game time experience. And you can't pull him every time he makes a mistake, or you can't go ahead and limit his minutes. You got to go ahead and tie his limits directly to his development. And in order to do that, that comes with real time experience. But I think that, he has shown that he has the maturity. For me, I think you can teach if you have God given talent, which all these athletes do. You don't make it to the NBA without having talent, right? I think that for me, I look at character of people. I look at, the things that you can't teach, the intangibles. And Immanuel Quickley has shown time and time again, much like RJ Barrett, that he's a lot more mature than his age says he should be. He's able to go ahead and deal with New York. He's able to deal with the fans. He's able to deal with the criticism. And sometimes for me, that's the most important attribute versus if somebody's shooting well, or if, they can go ahead and, dribble well, or all the other things. You can teach that. You can't teach character. He has the character. Now you have to develop his skill set. So that's what I want to see more from him next season. I want to see him more in a position to go ahead and get his skill set developed.
One thing just to follow up on Ashley there is the character of Quickley. Yes, people around the team speak so highly of him. Young player, seems to take the right approach to his job. And this Knick team, right? The record's terrible. But by and large, they haven't folded, right? Like after the All-Star break, they didn't fold. They're mostly competing night in and night out. They're not winning. They're competing though. And I think you talk to some people around the league, that's a reflection of the locker room and the character of the locker room. Because, we've seen in the past teams let go of the rope and start to really stop competing possession by possession. But by and large, this Knick team hasn't done that. I think that's a credit to the quality of player in terms of their approach to their craft that they have in that locker room.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to wrap things up in just a little bit with some final thoughts. And I'll start with you, Stefan. The Knicks face two play-in teams in the Hawks and Hornets before a matchup with the first place Miami Heat. So who is one person Knicks fans should keep their eyes on the next few days?
Trae Young. He's always fun to watch. Did he come to the Garden yet this season?
I don't think he played. No.
This is going to be his first time back at the Garden, so I'm looking forward to that. And let's be real, if he beats the Knicks, they're essentially, you could just bury him then. So it's an opportunity for Trae Young to eliminate them with his Broadway bow in the playoffs, and then get a chance here tomorrow to do something similar. So listen, I always enjoy seeing a villain come to the Garden, so I'm looking forward to Trae Young coming back tomorrow.
What about you, Ashley?
I'm not. I'm not looking forward. I mean, the storyline is great. I feel like, I was obviously too young to see the Reggie Miller, be the villain of the Garden. So this is kind of like a 2.0 millennial version. But yeah, I just think that it's going to be another demoralizing, game for the Knicks. I just think that I would much rather, it would have been a much more fun game to watch if like the Knicks were playing well. It could be that battle all over again. But, Trae Young coming to, the Garden to villainize these Knicks, it just seems like mean and unnecessary. Like, we're already in a bad situation. I don't need Trae Young to make it worse. But Knicks fans don't care because they are going to be hostile. So I hope Trae knows that much.
Well, I will say this. So, I remember in the miserable season, it was 2020 season, 2020, 2019, 2020, when Kristaps Porzingis came to the Garden. Knicks were terrible, but they beat Kristaps Porzingis, and the Garden was lit. It was.
Yes.
So, if the Knicks play well and you get an enemy at the Garden like Trae Young, it could be fun. It can. I know the circumstances of the season aren't great, but it could be a good time.
Yeah, moral victory. What about you, Ian? Who's one person Knicks fans should keep their eyes on the next few days?
Hey, I don't know if he's going to get minutes, but Kevin Knox with Atlanta, if he comes in,
Yeah, we forgot about Kevin.
Yeah.
comes
Our boy
off the
Knox.
bench and sees the floor, it's always interesting to look at a guy you traded away, see how they look in a different uniform, in a different setting. Knox, very talented player. He showed it early on in his Knicks tenure, didn't get minutes, didn't play later on because he didn't show enough to the coaches, but maybe he shows you something on Tuesday night if he does play.
Yeah, maybe he goes off at like 30 or something. Who knows? Anything can happen. But that's going to do it for this live edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our thanks to Ashley Nicole Moss for her insight, as well as Stefan Bondy of the Daily News. We're back to our classic format next Wednesday, the 30th. So check us out at 4 p.m. For Ian, I'm Chris. Thanks so much for watching, guys.